Good evening, everyone. Dr. Vrinda, can you hear me?
Yes, Kripa.
You can give to me.
It's so good to see you.
Yes, same here.
You want to sit here?
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so it's already
It is
4,
everything
so maybe
okay.
we can begin. So first of all, good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us for the HSH lecture series initiative.
Started this one.
Today we have with us Dr. Vrinda Varma, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at the National Institute of Technology Calicut. She has been teaching at the college level for the last 14 years. She's an award-winning translator who has translated many works from Malayalam into English, including the Panchatantra for children, and a selection published as Lords, Legends, and Folktales from Kerala, Khaleefa, Umar, and other moral stories, including various others. She won the Heim Translation Grant for 2024, instituted by PEN America for her ongoing translation of S. Girish Kumar's Alingam. She has also authored textbooks for school children at various levels. She was a Nehru Fulbright Doctoral Research Fellow at Boston University Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program in the year 2016. Dr. Vrinda's talk is titled Translation as Art and Translation as Labor, and it will look at aspects of the dual nature of translation, how it can be both an artistic endeavor and a laborious profession, and various other, aspects of translation,
Actually, I can.
including the translator's role in interpreting,
But
as well as the
thought I
invisible
have given
labor
and I have
that
taken
translators
again.
are often, seen doing. So, thank you so much for joining us today,
Listen to this.
and I hope that the students will, make the most of this opportunity
Actually,
and
they are also
interact with the
meeting
speaker
today. They are
after
also
the
meeting.
session. So, over to you,
Oh,
Vinta.
maths.
Hmm.
Oh,
That's why
So
they.
thank you, Kripa, for having me over, and it's a pleasure. So I have a few slides, and I will share them. Let me know if you can. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. Okay. So let me just share my screen. Yeah. I hope that's visible.
yes.
Yes. Okay. So before I begin my speech, I was talking to Kripa yesterday and I asked her, what kind of audience should I expect? Would they be MA students or PhD scholars? So I understand that all of you are PhD scholars here. And I just want to know how many of you are working on translation, area of translation studies. Is there anybody working on translation? Just a show of hands would do. Just um, one person. Okay.
And me.
Yeah, okay. Yes, Kripa, of course. So I have not prepared a very heavy kind of a presentation, right, that talks about translation theories or anything of that sort. I've tried to keep it simple, and I've tried to relate it to my own personal experiences as a translator. Okay, so that's the basic structure, and Pippa has already told you what you can expect. So the title of the talk is Translation as Art and Translation as Labor. You see, any kind of creative writing, we automatically understand that it is art, right? We don't need to mention it again. It's a creative process. But somehow, when it comes to translation, it's a little dicey. We know that there are terms like transcreation, and over the last few years, translators are much better appreciated than they used to be previously. So we have awards for translation. In India, we have the JCB award, which is much coveted ever since it has been incepted. And last year we have the Booker. Last year, the year before, we had the Booker Prize, right? That was given to translators. So Jenny Uppenbach and her translator. So it is a good time to be a translator, right? There is more attention to reading uh, works from other cultures, from other languages. People are always on the lookout for new works, right? New stories, new cultures to read about. So I think this is one of the best times to be a translator, but it is also challenging, right? Now, I became a translator by accident. Okay, I did not want to be a translator. I did not aim to be a translator. I had not even written anything remotely creative other than random blog posts, which I'm sure everybody does at some point of time. So I was working on a textbook project. This was way back in 2015. And the editor of the project, or the person in the publishing house with whom I was working with, once the textbook work was over, she asked me that if I would be interested in translating, and this was translating the Panchatantra for children. Now, the Panchatantra is a famous work. I don't need to talk about what it is, right? And we have had umpteen translations from the original Sanskrit. We have it translated in English by many translators. We have the Amar Chitrakatha, the Amar Chitrakatha, who has also, taken some stories from Panchatantra, made it into the graphic format that we know. And so there have been lots of translations. And I was very, very hesitant, right? Because it is a work, it is well known, it has already been translated. What do you need me to do? But the work that I was asked to translate was Panchatantra, that was translated from Sanskrit to Malayalam by a very famous Malayalam author called Sumangala. So I was asked to translate the Malayalam version, right? And this was especially meant for children. That was my first tryst with translation. And I very quickly discovered that it is not easy as it sounds. Yes, proficiency in language is something that is a given, right? You have to understand the target language as well as the source language, the nuances of both. And it took me a long time to get through to the translation, right? So and it went through multiple iterations. The first few stories that I sent to the editor, they proofread it, they didn't have much of a problem. But as in when I went along with the translation, I translated about 20 to 25 stories, and I understood that my first bit of translations were not good because they weren't reading in a very organic manner. Because for me, as a reader, when you read translated works, for me, the actual in Hindi, this is the kasauti, right? The test of a translator or a translated version is when you can't really make out that this is a translation. It has to read very fluently. It shouldn't draw its own attention to being, oh, look, I'm a translated work, and maybe you don't understand this, you don't understand that. Though what I say could be contested, but for me as a very lay reader, that is what I look for in translation, something that is easy to read. And for me, the first few stories that I translated from the Panchatantra was not doing it at all. So I went back and did it. And then after that, I ended up doing some more translation projects, some of which I will also discuss in some detail during the presentation. So what I want to say is that I haven't done a lot of translation work. I've done a few. So I have some practicing knowledge or practical knowledge about how translation happens and what I look for when I'm translating a work, right? The second thing that I want to let you know is that my research interest is not in translation studies. I have not done my research on translation. My research has predominantly been in gender studies. So what I speak from a point of experience from having translated a few works, right? So, like I said, this is something that you shouldn't expect from me, that it is going to be very theoretically challenging or anything. And just maybe some of the things that I'm going to tell you, some of you already know. If so, bear with me. Otherwise, I hope I can take you through some of the facets that, for me as a translator and as somebody who reads a lot of translated work, pay attention to. All right. So I will take you to one of the most famous works of all time, and the author, of course, Albert Camus, and the work The Stranger. So the line, right, and I do not know French, so pardon my pronunciation, and I know I'm speaking to a crowd from NIT Puducherry, so you might have some working knowledge of French, I do not know, but I will try to read the sentence as it says at the end of that slide there. Right? Aujourd'hui, maman est morte. Right? And I just did a random Google Translate of the sentence, and Google Translate told me that the sentence translates to today, mom died. Now, if you look at the translation that has been given there, it says mother died today, right? And then it goes on to say, or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure. But the first line, right? So we have a French sentence which says, aujourd'hui, maman est morte, and Google Translate tells me that it could be translated as today, mom died. Now, Stuart Gilbert, the first person to attempt translating The Stranger by Albert Camus, translated the first sentence, the opening sentence of the work, right? And he translated it as Mother Died Today. He also translated the title of the work as The Outsider, not The Stranger as we know it today. And it was only in 1982 that Joseph Loreto and Keith Griffith translated it as The Stranger, right? So they modified the title. So let's go back to Mother Died Today. Now the actual translation, the literal translation would be today mother has died, right? Or like Google Translate tell us, today mom died. But then it's a very awkward way of phrasing things, right? We don't speak something like that. We don't talk about, it doesn't sit grammatically very correct to us when we say, today mother died. So what could have been the reason for, Gilbert to work on the syntax a little, change it a little, right? So more than a literal translation of today mother had died, why did he choose to go with mother died today, right? So, and there have been a lot of discussion on this, and it says that he has not changed the meaning. Gilbert has not changed the meaning. Of course, mother died today, today mother died. What difference does it make? But then the argument is that what Gilbert changed was not the meaning, but the perseverance of meaning. What I'm trying to say is that The Stranger is a work where you have the central character called Mesol, who's a man who lives for the moment, right? He's all concerned about today, the now, the present. He's not plagued by his yesterdays. He doesn't bother about what happened in the past. He's not worried about future. He doesn't overthink. He's a sort of a detached person, right? So when you shift the focus of the sentence from today, mother died, to mother died today, right? There is an entire shift in focus that happens, right? Why did Gilbert do that? No, we're not really sure. But then in 1988, Matthew Watt, another translator, changed just one word of the opening line, right? And he changed it to, instead of mother died today, he used the French word for mother, maman, died today. Now, if we go back to the story and also to a little bit about Camus, both Massaw and Camus both acutely felt the loss of the relationship between themselves and their mothers, right? So in The Stranger, we have Massaw, who's a settler in French Algeria, who weeks after his mother's funeral kills an unnamed Rabman in Algiers, right? And the whole novella, it's not even a full-blown novel, but it's a novella. It's concentrated on Masol's relationship with his mother, right? So for 42 years since the first translation by Gilbert, the sentence that began Camus' Stranger read mother died today until Watt changed to maman died today. And then suddenly you have this eureka moment, right? Till then, it was a normal sentence. But the moment you replace mother with maman, you realize that mother would maybe not have fit in there at all, right? Mother is like a word, a static word, right? It is a signifier. It doesn't really talk about any what can you say, emotional connect, right? It's a lifeless term. It doesn't signify any closeness, no love. Who calls your mother as mother in a formal way, right? It doesn't indicate anything. So it's an archetypal term, right? There is some sort of a formality, some sort of detachment associated with the term. It's like you have a pet cat in your house and you name it Cat, right? So it's like naming your mother, mother. Uh, but then what other word, if not mother, what other word could an English translator or somebody who was translating it into English, what word could they have used, right? Mommy. Now, when you hear the word mommy, right, it immediately draws your attention to maybe the speaker is a little child, right? Mommy. There is some sort of a pity. There is some sort of, a sort of sympathy to the child, right? A grown man doesn't call his mother mommy. It's going to be a child who's going to call it mommy, call his or her mother mommy, right? So then mommy would probably not have fit in well today. Now, Google Translate says mom. Could the translator have used mom? Maybe. But then mother has two syllables, right? Mommy has two syllables. Mama, again, has two syllables. Mom has one syllable. So there is the softness that you associate with a word like mama is lost, right? It's hard. Uh, it's single syllabic. So the cadence of this word that was there in Camus' original is also not there, right? So when Ward translated, he actually did not translate. He left the word as it is, right? Mama died today. And this is not a word that is difficult for somebody who speaks and understands English to parse, right? So across all languages, right? In our South Indian languages, in Indian languages, the word for mother begins with ma, or you have, in Malayalam, we call our mother amma, right? Similar in Tamil, in Telugu, right? In Hindi, you have ma, and you have some variant of the ma sound across all languages, right? So even if you do not know what the word means, you can still kind of figure out that this means mother. So there is no emotional baggage that comes with this word. You understand what it means, but there is nothing like the difference between mother and mommy is not there, right? But you immediately draw attention to a kind of relationship that the French person, right? Somebody who speaks French, maybe the character, maybe the author. So it immediately draws your attention there without hindering any of the meaning making process, right? But then the syntax of the sentence is still different, right? In the original, we have mother or mama that is sandwiched within the sentence, right? So you have the French, a few words at the beginning, a few words at the end of the sentence, and then you have mama sitting in the middle of the word, right? So for both Camus and for the main character, Massaw of the work, the mother figure was a central figure, right? So when you begin the sentence with mother instead of retaining it at the middle of the sentence, the syntax sits quite, there is something slightly off with the syntax, right? It should have been central. The sentence could have been rewritten. And though we say that there is no perfect translation, every translation aims to better the previous translation. It may or may not be better than the original. It can add on to the original, right? But we always live in perpetual hope that a translation can always do better. So in that sense, what could have been a better way to translate? Maybe saying today, Mama died, right? When you say that, you are retaining Mama, which is the French word, which Watt gave. You have maintained today at the beginning, which draws attention to the presentness of the situation, right? The character wanted, or the character that we come across in the work is somebody who's rooted in the present. He doesn't care about the past or the future. So beginning the sentence with today, yes, quite good. Mama in the middle of the sentence, and then the fact of her having died, right? So this could have been one way to translate, but again, we cannot go back and now ask what was the rationale behind each of the translators into translating what it was. And we also do not have any record of Camus saying which translation he preferred. We don't have any such clue. So we have to go with whatever we have, right? And and also I would like to go back to what Venuti says. So Lawrence Venuti is one of the theorists when it comes to translation studies. And now here we are talking about So different translations. And what Venuti says is that when you translate a work for the first time, right? So the translation of a source text um, places it in such a manner that the others, people belonging to the other language, right, are made aware of its existence in the target language. So recurring translations, retranslations, what they do is they serve to assimilate the work into the target language and the target culture. So the first intention of a translation is to just put it out there. The second one, it is a value addition, right? It creates a value in the target culture. When you know that one word has been translated over and over many times, many translators, you immediately start thinking about why has it been translated so much? Is there something still that remains to be translated, or can I do something better with it, right? So I obviously, when I started translating the Panchatantra, I was not making any informed choice like this. I did not go back to read Venuti, though I had studied him in my post-graduation. I did not go back and do that. I also did not read about the whole translation process of the first sentence of The Stranger. But now I look back on my first translation, I also understand that what I was doing was not attempting to create something that was extraordinary. I was not trying to better the translations. I was only trying to add value to the original source text. That is what was important, right? Uh, so any translation, and this is something Venuti has said, and this is also something that I also believe in, it shouldn't naturally assume that it seeks to do a better job, any new translation, right? But it should still try to address some issues in the source text, right, as well as translated text that preceded. So that is probably what Ward did, right? Without even translating, he tried to improve, right? On some problems that he thought it could be. So it's kind of you problematize through translation. Now, one of the key readings in translation studies is Walter Benjamin, and I personally quite enjoy his essay, The Translator's Task, and I think it's every time I read it, it opens out a lot of new interpretations for me, right? And I quite enjoy reading Benjamin's idea about what should a translated work do, what does a source language do, and I quite also enjoy his idea about how cultures interact and also exclude each other. So I'm going to give you a quote by Walter Benjamin, taken from The Translator's Task. This was published in 1923, right? So this is from the essay. The words brought in German and pain in French intend the same object, right? So both brought and pain mean bread. But the modes of this intention are not the same. It is owing to these modes that the word brought means something different to a German than the word pain to a Frenchman. And these words are not interchangeable for them, that in fact they strive to exclude each other. The intention, the two words there, it shouldn't have been there. So it's just a continuation. Anyway, so what Walter Benjamin says, so he takes the example of bread, right? And he says, so bread in German is brought, and bread in French is pain, right? So it's a simple one, right? But then he says that the way German speakers experience and understand bread through the word brought is different from the way French speakers experience and understand it through when you say pain, right? And this is not simply a linguistic difference, right? They stem from certain cultural, historical, linguistic factors, in addition to the linguistic factors that shape how each language conceptualizes something, right? So the passage highlights what Benjamin tries to say, and what I interpret is that while both words refer to the same object, that is bread, the way the language conceptualizes that or relates to that object is distinct and different. And this mode of difference, what Walter Benjamin calls the phrase, the mode of intention, is what makes the words unique in their own respective languages, right? And they're not easily interchangeable. So you cannot change or exchange brought with pain, right? So imagine you have, and for context, I can give you the example of bread. So I just went and Googled for brought, for pain, and bread. And these are the images that I got, right? So there is fundamentally a difference. Even when you look at the pictures, the images, when I say bread, for us Indians, slice, right? Neatly cut slices that we get in packets, right? Your Britannia bread, that's probably what comes to your mind. But for a German, when you say brought, the image at the top left-hand corner of the slide, that's what comes to their mind. So this is more like a sourdough bread. The shape is different. Everything is different about it, right? So the way we understand bread is different from the way Germans understand bread. And similarly, the French word pain, right, which also means bread. And I just searched for French bread, and that the image on the right hand side is what I got, right? So visually there is a difference, which also means that the intention, which is what Walter Benjamin was talking about, the intention that a language strives to, the intentional meaning is also different. To give another example, suppose you have a photograph of the same person, right? One of the photographs could be taken from a distance, right? And the other could be taken from a close proximity. So let's say a passport size photograph, for example. Both photographs are of the same person, right? But the purpose is different, right? When you look at the image, so the difference between a candid photograph and a staged photograph, that is also different. It's the same person, but the intentionality of the photo is different. So similarly, that is also what Walter Benjamin is saying. One is not replaceable by the other. Where you need a passport size photograph, you cannot replace that with a candid photograph, right? Though they are the same person, they signify the same person. The person in the photograph is the same, but you cannot exchange, you cannot interchange. Now, Walter Benjamin also asked the question, right? Can we translate at all, right? We have been doing it for a long time. Yes, people have been translating, retranslating works. We have been translating from oral to the literary. We have been translating across languages. We have been retranslating. We have been translating across mediums. And these days we have a large industry in subtitling, right? You have, we watch Korean K-dramas, we watch movies in different languages, and you have subtitles, you're translating. And so, but then can we translate at all, given that there is such a lot of thought process, the labor that is associated with translation, right? So I started with Stranger, right? And I went on to talk about Walter Benjamin, and when he talks about brought and pain. And you might think that this is a very academic way of looking at it. It is, right? As a layman, as somebody who just picks up a work to read, do we really pay such a lot of attention to the nitty-gritties of translation? But when you ask the question, can we translate at all? We can think about two camps of people, right? So the first camp of people are people that we call as purists, right? And they say that unless we stay true to the original, right? Word by word, sentence by sentence, meaning by meaning, intention by intention, right? We shouldn't translate at all. The translation that doesn't do any of these things is not a valid translation. So, sorry, excuse me. They're probably talking about a translation, a Google Translate before Google Translate, right? Verbatim, everything precise. There is no difference from the source language, from the source text and the translated text, the target text, right? But on the other hand, you have relaxes, and that's the term that I would prefer to use. So liberals, if you want to call it, where, so like I said, you say chill. It reads well, the meaning is conveyed. Why do you need to go into the nuances? It's fine, right? But I would like to go back to Walter Benjamin again. And Walter Benjamin asks us, so what does a literary work say? What does it communicate, right? So these days, with the advent of AI, with Google Translate, it's very easy to translate, right? You have word-by-word translations, you have online dictionaries that will translate it for you. You can have different variations, you have use in sentences, you ask for it, it is there. So the meaning, the translation of meaning is not a problem. But then when you translate a literary work, why are you translating it? Are you translating it just so that people who don't have access to one language can read, who cannot understand the original can read it in a different language? And for Benjamin, that is that perspective, that it is the assumption that translations are primarily meant for readers who don't understand the original is a flawed representation, right? What he tries to say is that a literary work says far more than just information or facts, right? The essence of a work, it's not just translating the events, perhaps, right? So there is the unfathomable, the mysterious, the poetic, certain intangible qualities that evoke emotions in us, right? How many of us have read certain works and then been moved to tears, right? Or some utterance by a favorite character that has stayed with you for such a long time, right? Or whenever you want to express yourself, you fall back on a few lines by a poet, right? How often have we done that? So it's not just a translation of meaning, it's much more than that, right? That it evokes a certain imagery, right? So, for example, the pain and the broad that I spoke about, the imagery that it brings with it, it's not a literal translation. It's not just a translation of a word, of a meaning, right? It is something that resonates with the reader, somebody who experiences it, right? But then Benjamin also says this, and I find this very, very interesting. He says that no poem is intended for the reader, no picture for the beholder, no symphony for the listener. So he says that the reader doesn't matter, right? The reader doesn't matter. He's probably putting the onus back on the translator, right? You're translating it because you want to translate some emotion, right? Something that you want to convey. It doesn't matter who is going to read it, but for you as a translator, what does it mean for you to translate? How do you relate to this, right? And in that context, I would also like to bring your or drive your attention to this quote. Do you recognize the person in the image? She's a very famous translator. Anybody? I'll give you a clue. She's translated a lot of Marquis's works. Okay, she's Edith Grossman. Okay, she's Edith Grossman. So before Grossman started translating Marquis's works, his works were translated by Gregory Rabassa, and Marquis had really good relationships with both Rabassa as well as Edith Grossman. And Gabo has at some point said that Rabassa's translations were much better than his Spanish original, right? But going back to Grossman, so this is what Grossman talks about, the way she translated the work. And here she's talking about not Love in the Time of Cholera. I think I don't remember with which work she was referencing to while she was saying this. But then she says, and I quote and I read, "I knew this Colombian writer was eccentric when he wrote me saying that he doesn't use adverbs ending with mente in Spanish and would like to avoid adverbs ending in ly in English. She remembers thinking, what do you say in English except slowly? Well, I came up with all types of things like without haste." Right? So here, I think this is something that Walter Benjamin is also talking about, right? You're not translating so that somebody would read it. You're not translating just because somebody would read it, but you're also translating to stay true to the source text, the author, the sentiments of the author, right? So if the author does not like adverbs ending with mente, then it is up to the onus is on the translator to not have equivalents in English ending with ly. So it shows the kind of connect that a translator also has with the author. Now, it's not always possible. Sometimes I've heard about some of my other translator friends saying they've never spoken to that author, right? It came to us through an agency. We were asked to translate, right? We have, and then it was given to the author, it came back to us with some comments, we corrected it, and that was all. We have never really interacted with the author at all, right? And for me as well, right, by the time I translated Panchatantra, Vishnu Sharma was, nobody alive had seen him. And the person who had translated Malayalam, Sumangala, she was quite ill, and I have never been able to meet her, though I would have loved to. As a child, I've read a lot of her works in Malayalam, but I couldn't go back and ask her, is this what I did right? Right? Is this how you intended it? But some sort of connect or some sort of loyalty that the translator has towards the work as well as the creator of the work is also, I think, important when it comes to translating. Now I'll try and turn the course of the talk slightly and move from pure literary, famous, celebrated works to something on a more lighter note, right? So, how many of you have read Tintin? Tintin comics? I have. Okay, right. Do you know in which language this was written initially?
French.
Yes, it was written in French, right? So Tintin was written by Belgian cartoonist Georges Remy, and he used the pen name Herge. It's a very famous, what today we call the graphic novel, right? So we have Tintin, a boy journalist, and his dog Snowy, who goes on a lot of adventures, right, and solving crimes all across the world. They have come to China, they've come to India, they go to Arabia, right? Now, Herge, when Tintin had to be translated to Hindi, right, and this happened sometime in 2010, so a long time after Tintin was originally translated into English from French. In 2010, we have somebody trying to translate Tintin into Hindi, right? So the first criteria that they mentioned, and the author has also, the translator has also gone on record saying this. So Puneet Gupta has translated it from English to Hindi, and the advertisement or the notification or call for translators went out. The first thing that they wanted was somebody passionate about Tintin. The second criteria was somebody who actually knew Hindi. Right? The first major criteria was somebody had to be passionate about Tintin, someone who would stay loyal to the character. Right? Herge was not there; nobody was going to question it. But someone who had read Tintin in the original, loved it. Original, I mean, either French or English, because the English version is quite as popular as a French as well. So somebody who has read it, who has loved it, who knows the characters, right? And who was also willing to take inputs, right? So in French, it was this way. In English, it was this way. Can I incorporate that into my Hindi? And also the literacy test for the translator, and this I found very interesting, was that, so there is a character in Tintin, for those of you, who have not read the comic books, and I would urge you to read it. It's timeless. Adults can read it. I still enjoy it. My son, who's 10 years old, enjoy reading Tintin. And I'm sure PhD scholars are always in the lookout for something light to hedge their, heavy, theory-filled days, right, or dissertation-filled days. So Tintin is a good buffer, right? So there is a particular character in the in the comic called Captain Haddock. Now, he is somebody who abuses quite often, right? Very colorful abuses rolls out of his tongue. And one of the abuses that he uses is billions of blue blistering barnacles. And the other thing that he uses is thundering typhoons. So the advertisement for the translator for Tintin into Hindi always also wanted somebody who would, capture the essence of billions of blue blistering barnacles. And it ended up being translated to Hindi as Karod Kasmasate Kale Kachue. Right? It has nothing to do with billions. And blue has been translated to Kala, which is black, and barnacles, they have been translated to Kachua, which is tortoise or turtle, I'm not sure, right? But then cadence-wise, it sort of works, right? So billions of blue blistering barnacles, the alliteration is still there. Karod, Kasmasate, Kale, Kachue, wow, right? It
Camera
might
can
not
happen.
be the best translation. You might disagree. Oh no, this is not how Captain Haddock speaks, right? But even more shocking was some other kind of translation, right? So there are these twins in Tintin called Thompson and Thompson, and the spellings of these characters are quite funny. So we have twins. They are quite goofy. They end up in all sorts of trouble. They're supposed to be detectives, but I don't know what they do. And the spelling Thomson and Thompson. These are the two characters, right? Then their names were translated to Hindi as Santu and Bantu, right? So Thompson and Thompson became Santu and Bantu, and uh, so it might be scandalous for some of us, but then in the original, Thompson and Thompson was never there. It was Dupont and Dupont who became Thompson and Thompson. Tintin was unchanged, and Snowy is a dog that we find in the English version, but his real name was Milou. And Professor Calculus, who we come across in the English version, was actually named Professor Tournesol, right? And Captain Haddock and Bianca Castafiore, thankfully, their names were not changed. So then translating them as Santo Bantu in Hindi was also fine, right? Or you might think. Uh, but then it's just not the names that were a problem. So when Herge first began writing Tintin, Congo was a colony of Belgium, right? And the attitudes towards Africans were that of the colonizing country, and the people of Belgian Congo were depicted in a paternalistic style, right? And we come across, so there is a book called Tintin in Congo. We have Tintin having a lot of adventures in Africa. So this sort of racial tension does come out of the pages. And there has been criticism that Tintin is racist, Herge is a racist, right? But during the time of publication, there was absolutely no controversy. The book was very popular. And in 1980s, there was a lawsuit that sought to ban Tintin in Congo, the book, right? Because they said, this is highly racist. It should be banned. It should fall into the list of banned books. But then the judges ruled out that this work reflected the colonial attitudes of the times, but that Herge was not racist, right? Sorry. So, and that brings us to the the politics and ethics of translation, which Mona Baker was one of the first person to talk about the ethics of translation, right? Um, and she's the one to actually call out the notion that translation is just a linguistic process. Mona Baker says that translation is not merely a linguistic process, it's also a social, it's a political one, right? We're not neutral intermediaries. Our choices, our decisions, they have consequences for the source text, the author, the target audience, and the broader socio-political context, right? And so in this regard, the politics of translation, the ethics of translation, uh, I translated this work called Aithihymala, which is a very popular work in Malayalam, which is it's a compilation of a lot of legends about. And it was published in 1909. It was a series of 8 or 10 books by an author called Kottarathil Sankunni, right? And I'm not the first person to translate Aithihymala from Malayalam to English. We have T.C. Narayanan, who has translated it in 2009. Leela James translated it, I think, in 2015. Then Sri Kumari Ramachandran translated in 2015. And I translated Aithihymala as Lore, Legends, and Folktales from Kerala in 2020, right? So now this is a collection of stories. And it's also a collection of select stories written from a very specific standpoint, right? So Kottarathil Sankunni was a person from the upper class and upper caste. He was in favor with the rulers of the time, right? So most of the stories are stories of men, mostly from the Kerala upper class, upper caste, very rarely common people, and even rarely women, right? Um, so for somebody who has had a training in gender studies, it is very difficult for me to not find very many women characters in the work, right? Um, but also problematic was the male gaze, right? Not just at women, the very few number of women who come into the work, but also the male gaze at other male characters in the work who belong to lower castes, right? So the protagonists of most of the stories are rulers or ministers or Brahmins, right? Or some exemplar of medicine or music or sorcery, whatever it is, right? Um, so men of considerable historical, mythological repute. There are also elephants, stories of a lot of elephants, goddesses, right? But regular, everyday people are very hard to come by. So one cannot really disregard the manner in which the stories are. It reveres the elite upper caste male, right? While they consciously relegate the female as well as the lower caste male, right? And Terry Eagleton has told us that the patterns of discourse and narrative have helped to privilege dominant groups. Right? But this, as scholars of literature, as scholars of cultural studies, this is something that we have already understood. Right? That language has helped to privilege dominant groups and societies by aiding dominant ideological positions. Right? So the decision to translate certain prejudices found in the original text. I was aware that my role as a translator was to translate between two cultures, right? And I also understood that unintentionally I can add on to certain stereotypes that exist, right? Or that propagate dominant views from a culture. And this can create a barrier to understanding and appreciating the cultures. But I was not at liberty to change anything about it because it was written from a particular point of view. So, like Herge, who was not really racist, I'm not sure if Sankunni himself was a racist or he was, this is a fashion, this is the manner in which works were written during that time, where you had to revere the rulers, right? They were probably the ones who paid you, right? They allowed you to stay in your court, to sing their praises. So, it could have come from that. And though I tried to eke out very problematic, sexist, casteist remarks, I couldn't just take away everything, right? Then I would be doing injustice to the original source text. But in many places, I was conflicted. One particular place was when I was translating this story, this legend called Shaktan Tamburan. Now, Shaktan Tamburan was a ruler from central Kerala who lived in the 18th century. And in a particular anecdote from the story that is given in the work, so this ruler, Shaktan Tamburan, carries out the killing of over 500 Muslim men in order to snuff out one petty highway robber, right? So 500 Muslim men. And Sankunni, the author of Aithihymala, is absolutely raptured by Shaktan Tamburan. Right? He is, oh, what a great ruler. Nobody was spared. Someone has done a crime, the whole community suffered. Shaktan Tamburan, go you. That's the kind of attitude that Kottarathil Sankunni adopts. It is problematic for me, right? From a humanitarian standpoint. So there is somebody, a robber who has stolen one, if I remember right, one small pouch of coins. Then you have an entire, 500 men. It might be an exaggeration, yes, but also, and I found multiple records saying this did happen, the execution did happen. So I cannot omit this, right? I cannot, though it is problematic for me to read, to understand, it was disturbing, I cannot delete it. I cannot not have it in the story because apparently history text tells me that this happened, right? And if I delete the portion, then I'm trying to make Shaktan Tamburan into a kind of a nice guy, right? Who did not carry out such unwarranted executions. If I stay true to the source text and stick to the kind of, adoration that Sankunni places on Shaktan Tamburan, I couldn't bring myself to do it, right? I cannot celebrate this person for having done that. And within the contemporary sensibility, this is extremely problematic, right? So I tried, I'm not saying that is the best way to do it, but this is how I tried to do it. I stayed true to the incident, right? But I stripped the original text of the veneration that Sankunni lavished on the ruler, right? So as not to offend sensibilities mine, as well as the person who would someday read it as well. But then, like I said, it's a piece of history, so it had to be included, albeit in objective terms. But this is a kind of dilemma that I think translators are faced with, especially when translating problematic text, right? So if it is a dated text, it might not have been problematic at the time that it was written. But a few centuries later, some of the sensibilities are unpalatable to us. We do not know how to translate it best. We do not know what to make of the author, what to make of the character, the sentiments, right? And that is where Mona Baker talks about the ethical consideration, the political consideration, right? We are not simply translating linguistically, we are also translating culturally, we're also translating socially. We we ourselves are contextualized in history, right? And how do we uh, come to terms with our identity as somebody who's part of this society, this trans-linguistic system, as well as the text that we are translating into another system altogether. And this is something that I don't think will have one solid, strong answer, but it is something that any translator, anybody who's uh, trying to read up about translators and their work can always pay attention to the rationale behind translating something in a particular manner, the silences, the omissions, right? What has not been translated. That is also, I think, when we look at translated works rather. So what I try to look at the topic that I chose, translation as art and translation as labor, was translation is a piece of art. Any work that has been translated pays homage to the original source text, right? It places it in a context, it reveres it, right? But the process of revering it, worshipping a source work, it's not easy. It is a laborious process, and there is a whole lot of signifiers that a translator has to work with in order to bring it to fruition. So it is the art, it is also labor. And I would like to end with that. I would love it if you have some questions, and I'll try to answer it to the best of my abilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vrinda. I think that's a lot of food for thought. You touched upon so many different aspects of translation, moving on from translating for children to the intercultural politics between different languages and the cultural imaginations around the concepts like food and many other things, and also looking at the ethics and the politics of translation. So I think there's a lot from this talk that you can take, and many questions can be asked even from different fields. You don't have to be a translation scholar to be able to ask questions from this talk. So students, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask. Okay, I think until they formulate and come up with questions, there are a couple of things I wanted to bring up. Specifically, since you mentioned that you had translated for children,
Yeah.
the stories and Panchatantra, and which are also in terms of fables, I think, or
Yeah.
like moral stories. So when you're translating that, you mentioned that it's important to keep fluency in mind because
Yes.
the reader has to understand the story, and especially if it's a child, it has to be very, very accessible.
Yes.
So, are there any other strategies that you have to think of when you are translating for children, especially when it comes to very loaded concepts like, I mean, they may not come across race or caste or things like that, but what is your way to navigate some of the bigger, things in those stories?
Um, yeah, good question. Thank you, Kripa. So while I was translating Panchatantra, I've translated other works also. There was this book called Khaleefa, Umar, which is again written for children. But I found translating Panchatantra far more challenging. For one, it was my first attempt at translating. And also because I have not read Panchatantra in the Malayalam original before I started translating. My knowledge or understanding of Panchatantra comes from Amar Chitrakatha. So the stories that have been very nicely curated and given to us in the form of Amar Chitrakatha were, non-problematic. There was nothing, that a child would be scandalized about. But then when I started translating the Panchatantra, I understood that though it has been written apparently for children, some of the concepts that were mentioned there, like gender, for instance, right? Extramarital relationships, sex, right? These are all discussed in the Panchatantra. Now, how do you translate that for children? Right? And if you look at, so the my book was published by DC, and it has a very nice, attractive cover. They have publicized it quite a lot, and I know that a lot of children pick it up. But every time a child picks it up, I'm like, oh God, what is the child going to face in that? Because see, when it was written, the idea, the society that existed then. So this was written by Vishnu Sharma, right? If we be 5th century, and the understanding about gender, the kind of relationships that we have with the opposite gender, marital relationships, all those things are quite different from what we understand. And when you read the Panchatantra, you think that, oh, maybe they did have such conversations, right? That is the only way in which to look at it, rather than bowdlerize the whole Panchatantra, make it palatable, simplify it, right? So what I took away from the exercise was that let children understand whatever they can. It's not our job to simplify it for them. What I can do is with the language, so children like uh, or they enjoy, as children, we ourselves would have enjoyed it if the language had some sort of a flow to it, right? Too many difficult words and it will put us off, right? And if it is especially written for very young children, there is a cadence, there is a beat in the writing. So that is what I try to pay attention to rather than the content. I try to keep the content as it is. Let children understand. And I was also I tried to talk to my child's kindergarten teacher at that time. And, you know, wisdom comes to us from different sides. You don't really need to talk to somebody, a translation studies scholar to understand, right? So I talked to the kindergarten teacher and told her, ma'am, so I have to translate the works. How do you think children react to such terms, right? Or such concepts? And she said, we don't know, right? They probably only understand what they want to understand. The rest, they're just going to chuck it, right? And if they do understand, they have gotten it from a book. And this is going to be a good work because it has been there for centuries, right? Some sort of wisdom is associated with it. So why are you so bothered about it? And that's what I have also stuck with, right? Let children understand whatever they want to, the rest, let it be. So that is my point. When I translated Khaleefa, Umar also, there were certain areas which I found problematic. I thought maybe this is not suitable for children, but who am I to make the call, right? The child knows what it wants, right? We have to give the child a lot more credit than we associate or we adults tend to give it. So I did not try too hard to make it palatable, to make it simplified, but the language, yes, I tried to keep it simple.
The other question that I had was about the invisible nature, of translation itself. And I know in the last decade we are reading so much more, in English translation of works which are from Indian languages and all over the world. Translation has become a lot more, also canonized in a way by publishers and literary festivals and everything. So, in your experience, how have you negotiated this? The invisibility of the translator. Is it difficult to navigate with authors or with writers? Do you have to kind of jostle for space? How do you, the practical kind of, concerns from your experience?
I haven't had to jostle for space because I've not made a space for myself, right? I just translate very few words. And I think, see, you can look at translators' invisibility in two ways. One, these days translators are not invisible, right? You have very celebrated translators. So, for example, Jayashree Kalathil, who translates from Malayalam to English, she is one of the best known translators of our time now. And so when you read the way Jayashree has translated works, when you read it in English, it reads like English, but it also reads like Malayalam. I immediately know that, she is translated from Malayalam. It's a very fluent process, right? It doesn't hamper my understanding. So that is where the translator's invisibility plays, right? You're not drawing attention to Every time you're not saying, oh, this is a Malayalam word, this is an English word, this you have to check up with Malayalam, but it flows very organically, maybe with a few Malayalam words that are not difficult. So I've read translations from Hindi as well, right? And I don't read in Hindi, but I have read, so Gitanjali Shri's Tomb of Sand, right? There is a flow to it. You know that the locale is, northern India. You know where that happens. You're immediately drawn to the what you associate with, a certain period, right? But it also it's you read it in English, but there is a language in your head that also somehow tells you that it is Hindi without hampering your reading process, right? So the translator is invisible in the sense that it doesn't exact the reader to spend a lot of time trying to understand what is being said, to walk around with a dictionary, to refer, then it spoils the joy of reading for me, right? So in that sense, the translator has to be invisible. But earlier, when nobody spoke about translators, everybody spoke about. So Edith Grossman, how many of us speak about Edith Grossman? We talk about Marquez, right? We have read Marquez in English. We only talk about, so for us, Marquez wrote in English. For all you know, he is written in English, right? We don't really care about who translated it. But now I think translators are asking for, the demand to be seen. So in that sense, they're not invisible any longer. But for me personally, I haven't faced it because I'm still, very happy to be in the background doing my own quiet work.
Thank you so much. Abhirami, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, Vrinda, ma'am.
Good
So,
evening.
ma'am, my question is that when a translator is translating a text, if it is from the text originates from a different culture and the translator is from a different culture, so is the translator's culture going to influence the translated version of the existing text, ma'am, in any way? Are there any potential obstacles to it, or are there any advantages to it? I would like to know about it, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you for the question, Abhirami. I think a translator's culture definitely influences, right? So I gave you the example of translating from Malayalam to English, the Shaktan Namburan example that I gave you, right? So the background that I come from, I am a Malayali. I live in Kerala. I've heard about this ruler, right? So on paper, our culture is the same, right? Both of us are from Kerala. He was a ruler who lived in the 19th century. I am somebody who is living right, in the 21st century. But then, so the culture, you assume it to be the same. But then so many years have passed, so many centuries have passed. My sensibilities are different, right? So it does create a friction. And that is when we are stumped. How do you translate this? How do you say this person killed so many people of a particular religion and celebrate it? I couldn't bring myself to do it. And I'm sure the same thing would happen if it is an entirely different culture, right? So, for example, a culture that is welcoming of, let's say, pure relationships, right? And a culture which is very closeted, right? A person coming from either of the cultures would have a problem. So if you were to translate uh, what was that word? Timothy Chalamet acted in the movie version of it. Mm,
Do you
call
know?
me, call me by your
Call
name.
me by your name.
Yeah, call me by your name. So if you were to translate that into a very rigid society that looks down on gay relationships, right? It's going to be difficult, right? If I am also from my context is something that looks down upon queer relationships, I will find it difficult to translate, right? So I think that friction is there, and uh, some sort of friction should always also be there in order for you to hone your craft. If it comes to you very easily, then I think there is something wrong. You're not thinking enough. You're not putting in enough labor, right? So it is going to be there, and I would welcome such challenges as a translator.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you for that clarity.
Thank you.
Yes, any other questions?
Uh, yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Dr. Vrinda. It was a very beautiful presentation, and specifically for people who are not from the field of translation, it was a bit of eye opener for all of us. And
Thank
probably
you.
you have made it very diversified also. I mean, as Kripa said, it was there were so many things into this presentation. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
So basically, I just wanted to know that are there any specific strategies which could be employed by the translators when they are translating regional idioms or proverbs, or say very specific, we can tell, I mean, culturally specific terminologies and all, for which there is no equivalent in the target language. So how
Yes.
do we navigate this problem?
Yes. Thank you, ma'am, for that question. So this is an ongoing debate, right? And there are two factions, right? So the first faction says that certain things needn't be translated, right? It is not the translator. It should be dependent on the reader. You know, it's the if the reader needs to understand, let them take that effort. The translator needn't translate a lot of things, right? You let the reader take the effort to understand what you're trying to say. The um, the other group, right? So in translation studies, we call it the process of domestication and foreignization. The other group says that, you have to translate, because why do you make things difficult for the reader, right? Translate it, simplify it, explain it in as many terms as you want to, but let it be legible to the, reader, right? And we have variants of this discussion, but it is not something that has been solved. I'll give another personal example. So again, going back to Aithihymala that I translated, there in that there was a story about a person called Bhiman. Now this is not Bhima from Mahabharata. This is a person whose name nobody knows, but he's called Bhiman because of his superhuman strength and his gigantic size and everything. So in one instance from the story, Bhiman is having food, right? And in Indian culture, people are expected to have food with their right hand. So the right hand is the hand that you use to have food with. And Bhiman was eating his food when somebody called him to help, right? And the help was that he had to lift something out of the well, right? No, I get it wrong. So Bhiman finished his lunch. He was eating his lunch, and he went to the well, right, where he was supposed to wash his hands. Now, when he went to the well, he saw that there was something wrong with the well. Something was stuck in the well. There was a big boulder that had sealed off the well mouth, right? And nobody could pull the rock out other than Bhiman, right? Now, what did Bhiman do? With his left hand, he pulled the rock and it came away. It is as simple as that, right? So two things. One, Bhiman was eating with his right hand. So he had only his left hand that was free, and he used the left hand to, move a boulder that nobody could have done it. So it speaks about Bhiman's superhuman strength, right? You would think it was simple, but the term that was used in Malayalam, right? So Bhiman did not use his echil kai. Now echil kai is, in Hindi we call it chuta, right? So the hand with which you eat your food, it's polluted. Right? Echil in Malayalam is equivalent of saying it's polluted. You don't use your chuta hand to take anything else from the table, right? And remember that Bhiman is also going to the well to draw out water. Now the well is also very important. It's a symbol of purity, right? You don't touch it when women, unpure women who are menstruating, they don't go near the well. Bhiman is eating, his hand is chuta. He cannot use his right hand to pull the boulder out. He can only use his left hand. Right? But how do you translate this to a Western audience? How do you tell them that, so many things are there in that one word called echil? In Malayalam, echil, everybody knows, right? Echil kai. No explanation needed whatsoever. But how do you translate that into English? I spent such a lot of time, and in the end, I ended up simplifying it just by saying that, he couldn't use his right hand, which he was using for eating, and he used his left hand. I couldn't do anything else about it because it was just one word. I couldn't spend 2 or 3 lines explaining it and killing the flow of the story. But this was a problem that I faced. Now, some other translator would have employed another strategy. I'm not saying mine was a better strategy. Somebody else would have done it differently, right? So Sukumari Ramachandran, who translated the text right before me, has used an entirely different thing, right? So she said, he tucked his polluted hand, right? He did not use his polluted hand or something. He used his left hand. That is one way of translating, right? Many others would have done it differently. So there is no one right way of doing, but this was a problem that I faced. And I'm sure there are so many more, like proverbs. I gave you the example of Tintin, right? Billions of blue blistering barnacles was translated as something entirely different. But in Hindi, it would have made sense, right? So I think there is we call it lost in translation. There will be something that is lost, but there will always be something that is gained as well.
Okay, thank you. That means, do you feel that this concept of this cultural translation, how does it influence the translation process in a global sphere? Does it have any impact on that?
I think we have to go to Walter Benjamin and say that you don't really translate for the reader, because once the translation is done, it's done. The author is dead. So is the translator. Once you have done that, it's on the reader, right? So you cannot really predict in such a globalized world where books are being sold left and right in different book fairs across the world. And how do you know who's going to read it? So, and we have a very generic understanding of the Western world. If you go to Europe, London is different from, Europe is not London, right? Or Britain, Yorkshire is different from Ireland, from Scotland. A lot of differences there itself. You go to Germany, it's different. You go to America, it's different. Even in America, you go to Massachusetts, it's different. You go to Los Angeles, it's different. So we only have a generic understanding, right? So we cannot really predict who's going to read it. All that we have with us is the source text, maybe the author as well, and we have to work with that.
Okay. Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Vrinda. That's what, when you ask the question, is translation at all possible? Can we really translate? I think everything again melts down to that. That question is very pertinent, that whether real translation is ever possible. Thank you so much for that consolidated answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
It was lovely listening to you speak. You touched upon a lot of topics. And as a translator myself, I am more interested in listening to your experience as a translator. So there are two questions I would like to ask you. The first one is, you have mentioned the use of Google Translator or AI. So we are in a time when AI, there are a lot of softwares that assist us in translating. So from your experience as a translator, I would like to hear you speak about how AI undermine translation as both art or labor, or does it help more in bringing out the art in translation, or to ease out the labor? So, what is your experience as a translator?
Okay, thank you, Renita, for that question. So I have one of my scholars who's working on not AI, but NLP translation of fiction. And we have a lot of corpus linguistic studies that look at digital translation tools and so on. And if you look at non-literary texts, it has made significant progress. Right? There is a word-by-word translation for legal terms, for medical terms, right? Non-literary translation has become so much easier with the advent of AI and large language models. But when it comes to literary translation, there is a lot of gray area, because the ambiguity that Empson speaks about, right? So he speaks about 7 types of ambiguity. I'm sure there are more, right? Because what did the author mean in a particular context? What does this word mean? What was the intention? There is also the intention of the author, the intention of the character, the intention of the translator, right? So a lot of scope for ambiguity between all of these things. And I don't think AI has developed enough to capture that essence. And also to say that there is no one perfect translation, right? So until Ward translated mother as mama, we accepted that mother is dead as okay, right? It is good translation. But then suddenly mama replaced mother, and then you said, oh, that's the aha moment. This is better, right? So even with human translators, there is always a scope for improvement. And the rationale that we have for choosing particular words, so like ma'am was saying, proverbs, right? How do you find an equivalent proverb? That is an entirely different thought process altogether. And for literary translation, I think there is still a lot that AI needs to work on. I hope it doesn't work, right? Because there is so much beauty, there is so much joy in translating something, thinking about it, ruminating about it, right? Letting it stay in your mind, body, soul, and then, finally coming to that aha moment where you think, this is how I should be translating this. So I think that process itself is beautiful, and that is what I enjoy as a translator, right? This juggling between words, this word or that word, which can I use? So that is what I enjoy. And so I hope I have answered your question about AI. So with literary translation, it's still becoming very, very difficult for AI. It can be trained, but then without human intervention, even the training is not possible.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. I have one more question.
Sure.
So you talked about the politics and ethics of translation, and you have published your work, and you are also an academician. So I would like to ask you about the role. What role do publishing houses and academic institutions play in defining a translation? Uh, um, yeah.
Okay, loaded question. Let me just think about how to answer that. In academics, see, I think a translation always sits lower than an original text, right? So that the kind of fan following that a successful author has, a translator will never have, right? And it's similar in academic space, right? Especially, so you come from NIT, I'm also from another NIT. It's a very tech-oriented space, right? For us from humanities to fight for our existence itself it's an everyday fight, right? And there you're talking about translation as you again have to fight for space with translation. So in the academic space, especially within the technical world that we habit, it's very difficult. But it cannot compete with research articles or Q1 publications, right? It cannot sit with any of those things. But I think it is a futile battle to fight, right? Literature has always existed, whether it's in the translated form or otherwise. Literature will survive, books will survive. I don't think we need to really draw our attention to that. Real lovers of literature, real lovers of fiction, any kind of literary work, poetry, they will continue to read and enjoy translations as well as original works. Let's just ignore the fighting for space between academics. But as an academic myself, I feel that being a translator has also spoiled my laid back casual reading, right? I'm always oh, why did they use this word, or they shouldn't have done this, right? And this is not with the translated works, but also with any other work, right? Being an academic, being a research scholar, I'm sure you also experienced that at some point. Books that we enjoyed, movies that we enjoyed at some point of time, right now with the information and the knowledge and the sensibility that academia has given us, it has somehow spoiled that innocent reading that we had. Sometimes definitely for the better, we can now call out problematic areas, but certain things, I think being an academic and a practicing translator has spoiled casual reading for me.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible? Okay, I think.
Okay, so I think the round of questions are finally over. Does anybody have any other questions?
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Okay, so maybe we can wind up and.
Ma'am, there is one more question.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, it's not a very
Yes,
important.
Renit.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, ma'am. My quest. First of all, the talk was very lively and engaging. I am not somebody who is working in the area of translation studies, but I have attempted a few very amateur
amateur
translations.
translations.
I just
I
wanted
just
to
wanted to
ask
ask
you
you
how much
how
of your
much of your
translation
translation
you
you
consider as an
consider as an
original
original
work.
work.
Like
What
part of
part
it
of
you
it you
consider as
consider
your
as your
contribution, your
contribution, your
original
original
contribution,
contribution?
because the
Because the
idea of the
idea of
if you
the
are
if you are
translating a
translating a
story,
story,
the
the
original
original
ideation,
ideation,
the
the
story,
story, the setting,
everything is
everything is
coming from
coming from
somebody
somebody
else's
else's
imagination.
imagination.
Yeah.
When you
So
are
when you are
translating,
translating,
what
what
part of
part
it
of it
is
is
the
the
translator's own
translator's own
creation?
creation?
How do you
How do you
negotiate that?
negotiate that?
Okay, again, a very loaded question. I have not thought about it in that manner. How do I answer that? Uh, I think I've not really looked at it as a standalone work. It cannot. Any translation is not a standalone work in the sense that, it can only, a translated work can survive, or it exists because a source already exists, right? So in that sense, I have not looked at it as creating something entirely new. My focus has been on trying not to distort anything, right? That has already been there, and to spoil something for the reader, to spoil something for me. So I don't want to go back and read something that I've translated and feel, "Ooh, what did I do with this sentence?" So that has been my primary concern. But yes, it is an interesting question because we also talk about translation as transcreation. Right? It's not simply the linguistics or the semantics or the syntax of translating from one language to the other. So I think at some point, every bit of translation that we do is also creation, right? The process, like I said, I enjoy the process of searching for words, right, or phrases to match the original or to do justice to the original. So that process I understand is creative, but the output, I want to see a translated work as something that stays, that can be, how do I say it? That lives along with the original, right? It just doesn't have an existence on its own. So in that sense, I don't think I've created anything new. I don't even feel that translation is entirely creating of something entirely new. But the process, it's definitely creative, right? Whether it be struggling with the syntax or struggling with the cultural norms, translating culture, translating. So here, in the Tintin example that I gave, even the names of characters were changed. What difference could it have made? So in that sense, yes, it is creative. But otherwise, when I look back on the work that I have done, I don't think at it as having created an entirely new work. No. Also because the Aithihymala that I translated has already been translated multiple times. So I cannot look at it as an entirely new thing.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, that turned out to be an extremely enriching session and with a lot of questions, and also the way that you answered questions was again another, very important uh, source of knowledge for all of us. So thank you so much, Dr. Vrinda, for sharing your valuable time with us and your expertise, and talking to us a little bit about your craft as a translator and your experience as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. You have a wonderful audience. Such a lot of questions. Thank you.